Hey everyone, I'm back after yet another instance of claiming I would upload more often and then disappearing for a month, but this time I have a good excuse. You see, after the last video, I got tangled up in some stuff, nothing too serious, but if any of you just happen to be walking past the Scientology headquarters, maybe stop in and check it out. I hear there's some really cool stuff, like, for example, you should try the stairs near the back that seem to go impossibly deep underground and then keep walking until you hear the mechanical screeching sound, and check out that giant red door on the right. Maybe someone's in there, who knows? It's so fun. Anyways, let's talk about South Park. Ever since the release of South Park: The Fractured But Whole back in 2017, South Park fans have been eagerly awaiting the release of whatever was next. After the incredible success of both The Stick of Truth and The Fractured But Whole, everyone wanted more South Park video games. I've never really talked about it, and maybe one day I'll make an entire video about it, but these two games are easily two of my favorite pieces of South Park media, period. In fact, the release of The Stick of Truth is the reason I even started watching South Park in the first place after I watched PewDiePie's Let's Play. These games accomplished exactly what they set out to do, which is to really make you feel like you're in an episode of South Park. With tons of references to the show and some of the funniest moments from the entire franchise, these games were able to do something I never thought would be possible: make me enjoy playing a turn-based RPG. With the success of these two games, it was clear that they had nailed the formula to make incredibly immersive and funny South Park games. So, in late 2021, when it came out that a new South Park video game was in development, I was pretty excited. In August of 2023, they finally released the trailer for South Park Snow Day. The following is a recreation of how I reacted to seeing this trailer. Ooh, new South Park game, let's go. Oh, I'm so excited.
It's so beautiful!
Oh.
The most magical of days in a young child's life.
What? Alright. That looked pretty bad. Okay. Yeah, when I first saw this trailer, I was pretty disappointed. It seemed like I wasn't alone, as the general sentiment of fans at the time was just a lot of confusion. I thought the 3D art style looked weird and uncanny, and it definitely lowered my expectations for this new game significantly. But as time passed and they released more trailers, the 3D art style grew on me a lot. So much so that I actually ended up thinking it looked pretty good. So as we got closer to the release date, with my expectations pretty low, I actually got pretty excited to play the game. I'm definitely more of a multiplayer kind of guy when it comes to video games, so the prospect of playing a South Park game with some of my friends sounded like a good time. So, last week, the game finally dropped. I didn't get to play past the tutorial on release day due to becoming violently ill the day before, as you might still hear my voice. Voice? What the hell? Now, on release day, I didn't get to play past the tutorial due to becoming violently ill the day before, so I decided to go check out how the general public felt about the game. This was a big mistake.
Playing South Park Snow Day had me frigidly wishing I could be anywhere else. I can't recommend anyone waste their time on this kawaii.
But despite all of the criticism, I still tried to go in with a very open mind to try to enjoy this game as much as possible. I mean, I can always understand some hate, but surely it cannot be that bad, right? Well, there's only one way to find out. So I normally like to plan out a structure for my videos by breaking it into segments, but for this one, my thoughts are pretty scattered, so I'm just going to talk about whatever comes to mind. I'll still try to make chapters for those that want to skip around, but the topics aren't going to be very, rigid or anything. I also do want to make it clear that I didn't pay for this game myself. THQ Nordic was nice enough to give me a copy of the game, but that doesn't mean this video is sponsored. I've seen a lot of YouTubers that were sponsored by this game, and that's why I feel the need to specify that they're not paying me to talk about this game. All of the opinions I share in this video are purely my own. You'll just have to take me at my word when I say that them gifting me a copy will not affect the way I talk about this game. And they also only gave it to me after I asked them for one. It's not like they reached out to me. And when you hear some of the stuff I have to say, I think it'll be pretty clear that I'm not trying to be nice, and they definitely wouldn't pay me to say any of this stuff. Also, I'm gonna try to avoid any spoilers, but if I do end up talking about them, I'll be sure to give y'all a warning. So let's start with the price. Both The Stick of Truth and The Fractured But Whole are currently priced at $30 on Steam, and I'd say both of those games are well worth their price. I think they were technically more than that on launch, but they quickly moved down in price. Snow Day is currently priced at $30 on Steam, with a season pass worth another $25. So logic would tell us that if these games are priced the same, the quality and amount of content in the game should at least be pretty similar, right? We'll talk about it throughout the video. So instead, let's talk about the gameplay. How does it actually feel to play the game? Is it fun? Are there good upgrade systems? Is the combat any good? Is it engaging? Is it satisfying? Well, this is one of the aspects I was actually most excited for, since I'm a big fan of mindless hacking and slashing in games, and if you can make that a satisfying experience, I'll probably enjoy it. The combat itself is pretty simple. You get a melee weapon, a ranged weapon, and 2 special powers that use your pissed off meter, which is built up through combat. I saw a lot of reviews saying that the combat feels kind of floaty, it doesn't feel very responsive, and it's not very satisfying, but I have to admit, when I played this game, I actually really enjoyed the combat. While it's obviously not the most complex combat system in the world, there was definitely still a learning curve, as I noticed as I progressed throughout the game. I got a lot better at being able to chain together my melee attacks with my pissed off attacks, and I personally found it to be pretty fun and engaging. Now, it is very simple, as pretty much every weapon only has 1 or 2 different attacks it can use. I don't think this is inherently a problem. Personally, I like when there's only a couple of attacks on a weapon, because even when I'm playing a game with weapons that have a bunch of different attacks, I always end up just using the same 2 attacks anyways. But in the case of this game, I do think this is kind of a problem, mainly because of the limited options for weapons. Currently, there are only 3 melee weapons and 3 ranged weapons available, with 8 different pissed off powers also available. Now again, to some degree, I like the simplicity of this. I'm the type of person that finds a weapon they like and I end up using that weapon the entire rest of the game. For example, in my first Elden Ring playthrough, I literally used the Uchi Katana for pretty much the entire game. So I personally don't mind this too much, but I have to admit that it could definitely use some more variety. Like I said, I don't think it's inherently a problem to only have a few limited attacks on a single weapon, but if you're going to go that route, I think there should be a ton of weapon options so that each one can find more success with different playstyles, allowing you to find new and creative ways to spice up combat and adding a bunch of replayability. This is especially highlighted since the game is technically meant to be played in groups of 4. That means there's not even enough weapon options in either category to not overlap with your teammates. In theory, isn't the whole point of having a team of 4 that everyone has specific roles that they play? If you're guaranteed to use the same weapon as one of your friends, I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose. Now granted, your roles are definitely more based in your special abilities, but even with those, there's only 8, so there's still not a ton of variety there. Now I will admit that there is some degree of combat variety that comes through as you actually play a run, as you collect upgrade cards throughout a chapter that can make certain abilities weaker or stronger. So let's talk about these card mechanics. At the beginning of a run, and as you progress through it, Jimmy gives you a choice between a few cards that can buff different aspects of your character, weapons, or abilities. They're completely random, and whatever cards you pick can have a pretty big effect on how you play the game. And I ended up actually really liking this mechanic. Even though it can be kind of annoying to get screwed over with the cards, I do like how choosing different cards can affect how you end up using your own weapons and abilities throughout the game. It prevents the game from ever feeling like you're doing the exact same thing, and it definitely makes up a little bit for the extreme lack of variety in everything else. Another core mechanic of the gameplay is the bullshit cards. You pick from a random selection of 3 at the beginning of a run, while your opponent gets to pick 2. As the name suggests, these cards are totally unfair, and if the enemy uses one that is particularly annoying, it can really cause some chaos. Similarly, some of the ones that you get are pretty OP, allowing you to absolutely walk through some of the more difficult parts of the runs. I think this mechanic is fine. It's pretty evenly balanced with the limited uses. It's sometimes annoying and sometimes helpful, and I think it shakes up the run enough to be a fun mechanic, but it's nothing super special. So to round out my discussion of gameplay, it seems like the game is relatively well built. I didn't notice any significant bugs or glitches. There were a few things here and there, but for the most part, I'd say it was pretty solid. This audio bug that I got did jump scare me while peacefully playing at 4 AM, so that's something. What the fuck? So now let's move on to the content in the game. How much is there to do, how replayable is the game, and does the amount of content justify a $30 price tag? There are 5 main chapters that you can play through, with each of them taking me about an hour to complete in my first run. If you're not wandering around looking for secrets like I was and not doing anything unnecessary, you could probably finish each of them in about half an hour or less. 5 hours of content in a $30 game is definitely less than it should be, but something I noticed in playing through this game is that a lot of it was designed with replayability in mind. Despite my complaints sense of lack of variety in weapon and ability choices, the game does have a couple of unique ways that they attempt to spice it up on replays. There's a skill tree system in the game that uses a currency called dark matter, and upon completing the game for the first time, it felt like I had barely even started the skill tree. And while the skills further up the tree aren't totally game-changing or anything like that, it's clear that it's meant to be filled out in subsequent playthroughs, and it does add a bit more variety to replaying runs. There's also different difficulty settings. I played my first run on normal, and it wasn't that hard. I only died twice, and both times were due to me not understanding what I had to do and wandering around during a boss fight. However, this did make me realize that a game over in this game is a pretty big deal. I've heard this game is supposed to be a roguelike to some degree, and I'm not super familiar with that genre, so maybe this is common in those games, but it definitely caught me off guard when I died in the final boss fight of a chapter, only to realize that a game over means you have to replay the entire chapter. You could imagine that that's kind of frustrating when you're almost an hour into a chapter. It didn't really make the game any more difficult, it was just kind of annoying. However, I'm also kind of glad that I died there because it revealed to me something that I definitely did not expect, as I restarted the chapter only to be met with a completely new level I had never seen before, despite the fact that I made it to the final boss. So then I restarted again because I thought I accidentally started a different chapter, and then I was met with the level that had followed the first level in my initial playthrough. That confused me even more, and upon restarting the game a bunch of times to see what would happen, I realized that, at least for the third chapter, there are 3 different levels that are possible to play, but you'll only play 2 of them in a playthrough. Which ones they are and what order seems totally random. So it seems pretty likely that more chapters might have mechanics like this, with differing scenarios and levels that are completely randomized. Because it's random, it also seems like you could, in theory, play through the game several times and still not experience everything the game has to offer. I don't know how much of the game actually changes like this, but if there's more like this, then I think that adds a whole new layer of replayability to the game that makes no 2 runs exactly the same. I haven't played enough yet to know if this is the case for more areas of the game, but I have heard that other levels are randomized like this. I think that's pretty cool, and again, it kind of helps change it up a bit for a game that can be pretty repetitive. Another feature I noticed that encourages replay is the fact that after you beat the game, you get special quests from Nicole to earn dark matter faster throughout replays. Again, these quests aren't that special on their own, they just make some aspects of the run a little bit more difficult, but I think it adds another layer of uniqueness. But realistically, this game is performing at its best and the most replayable when you're playing with friends. Playing with friends is just significantly more fun than playing alone, as to some degree you can kind of build your own kits around what specifically you want to do and how your different abilities can interact with each other, and overall it is definitely the best way to play this game. The game also has online matchmaking, so if you don't have any friends to play with, you can go and play with randoms, but I have 2 really big critiques of the multiplayer system. First of all, there's no crossplay in this game, which means that you can't play with anyone if they're on a different console or if they're on PC or anything like that. I honestly don't understand how you make a multiplayer game in 2024 and don't have crossplay in it. I mean, it's literally been around for years now. Secondly, there's no in-game voice chat in this game. Now, for a lot of people, that probably won't be that big of a deal, but for me, one of the things I was most excited about in this game was just queuing with randoms that also like South Park a lot. The idea of chatting with some random South Park fans while just playing through the game sounded like so much fun to me. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any way to do voice chat in this game, and that really sucks. So please, to THQ Nordic, 2 super easy things to fix. Add crossplay and add an in-game voice chat. It can't be that hard to do, I promise. So now let's talk about what the majority of you actually care about, the story and the overall experience of this game from the perspective of a South Park fan. Now, if I'm being honest, this was probably one of the most disappointing aspects of the game. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate the story or anything, it just felt kinda nerfed, I guess. The best way I could describe it is it kind of felt like they were trying to avoid a mature rating, but at the same time, they forgot that you would get a mature rating if you were cursing throughout the entire game like they were. So it basically just felt like it had no edge. There was no South Parkness to it. Like, it kind of ended up feeling like if Vivzy Pop tried to write her own episode of South Park. That's sort of the vibe I got from the writing. And like most of the criticism of this game, I find that this wouldn't be such a big deal if it weren't for the fact that the other 2 games exist. Like, there were never any moments where a character said something that caught me super off guard, or something so outrageously offensive happens that my jaw is just on the floor because I'm so shocked by it. Like, I can't help but think back to playing the Stick of Truth for the first time and fighting through waves of Nazi zombie aborted fetuses at the Planned Parenthood, and just thinking about the fact that this level of absurdity is something I'd only be able to find in South Park's writing. Overall, the writing just ended up feeling really safe, and it's not like I need something outrageously offensive to happen to be entertained, but at the end of the day, the story just felt kind of like boring. I just wasn't super invested in it. Now, don't get me wrong, there were definitely funny moments. A lot of the character interactions, mainly between Cartman and the other boys, ended up being very funny moments. But I think that all around when it comes to writing an original story for this game, Matt and Trey were just simply not that invested in this. I mean, it's pretty clear that they just didn't even have close to the same amount of passion in this game as they did the previous two games, and therefore they didn't put the extra effort in to write a really, really great story. And I know it sounds like I'm hating on the story a lot, but keep in mind, I'm comparing this to the previous two games. So if I was just looking at the story on its own without any other context of it being related to South Park, or the fact that it's supposed to be a sequel to two of my favorite stories out of any video games, then I would say it's a really solid story. I think it was fun. I think it was entertaining. There were definitely funny moments. It just didn't feel like it was quite on par with what we expect from South Park. Another big issue I found with the story is the way that it's told throughout the game. Much of the story ends up feeling really disconnected from the gameplay itself, because we get these cutscenes where the boys are interacting with the new kid and each other, and these are some of the funniest parts of the whole game. But then we go to the gameplay, and the boys are hardly involved at all with the gameplay. Sometimes you'll hear the occasional quip from Cartman, or you'll be fighting one of the boys in a boss fight, but the vast majority of the storytelling is done in these cutscenes in between. Which again, doesn't inherently make the story bad. There's tons of great video games that do exactly that. But the problem is, when you're comparing it to the previous two South Park games, probably their biggest strength was their ability to tell a story through gameplay. From the countless character interactions and quips that would happen mid-battle, to the sense of exploration as you go through the town and find all these little Easter eggs and the smallest little details of things that you even forgot happened about in like season 5 or whatever. That's the kind of stuff that made those games feel so incredibly immersive, and it just made you feel like you were in the town of South Park. And unfortunately, this game just doesn't even come close to the original two in that regard. Now, it doesn't completely fail at this, as it definitely has some deep cuts and some interesting locations from the original show. For example, the ziplining park, the geologist's office, the 6th graders' hideout, Hell's Pass Hospital, and a few other locations that fans of the show will definitely recognize. But the issue is that's pretty much as far as they go. They also bring back an old beloved character, and it's a pretty big twist, so I'm about to spoil it, so if you don't want to hear it, skip to this timestamp. So it's revealed that Mr. Hanky is the one pulling the strings behind all of this. He's the reason for the snow day and everything. I think this was fine. You know, it's nice to see Mr. Hanky again. It wasn't anything that crazy. He ends up being the final boss battle, and I do think that the final boss battle is probably one of the best moments from the game, just because it's so ridiculous. It's definitely the only moment in this game that even felt close to the level of Stick of Truth and Fractured But Whole in terms of their wackiness. But in the end, for a South Park game, the story was just very underwhelming. Like I said, if we weren't comparing this game to the previous two South Park games, I don't think there would be nearly as many complaints about this, but it's just impossible not to make that comparison.
Wait, why are you trying to... Uh-oh.
Yes, but standing out here yelling rabble, rabble, rabble isn't going to help anything.
But we don't know what else to do, Mayor! Rabble, 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 rabble.
So now that I've shared my opinion on pretty much everything in this game, do I think it's worth the $30 price tag? Honestly, no, not really. Now, would I still buy this game for $30 even if I knew everything I just told you? Yeah, probably. Now here's the thing. It seems like they expect to be updating the game, adding more content over time, possibly content that correlates with the release of new episodes. If they add more chapters, weapons, cards, and all that kind of stuff over time, I could see a point where this game is worth $30. Now, in its current state, the game just simply does not have enough content to justify that price. I think if they released it for $20 or less, there wouldn't be nearly as much hate. Now, with that being said, I still ended up liking this game. If this were a game that had nothing to do with South Park, I'd still say it's a pretty good game. It's just overpriced. I forgot to mention that the game also most definitely shines in multiplayer. Playing it with your friends makes the game like 10 times more fun than just the default game. So while it definitely has its flaws, and I kind of made it sound like I hate this game just by how negative I was throughout this entire video, I actually do really like this game. I think it's fun. I'm definitely going to be playing through it many more times, and I plan to 100% it, get all the achievements. I want to do everything in this game because I like it. Also, whenever I get the time, I'm going to start speedrunning this game. My goal is to get #1 on the leaderboards. I will be streaming that, and I'll also be cutting it down and editing it and uploading those videos onto my second channel, so if you don't want to miss those, go subscribe. But my final thoughts on the game are mainly just that, yes, it's overpriced. Yes, the storytelling isn't great. It's not the best South Park has to offer, but it's still South Park, and it's still a good time, in my opinion. If I was rating the game, I'd probably give it about like a 6.5 out of 10. It's definitely not even close to a 3 out of 10 like IGN says it is, but I mean, let's be real, who's taking IGN's opinion seriously on anything now? And I do have one more suggestion for the creators of this game over at THQ Nordic and South Park Studios. Maybe you guys could add like a feature where you could put like sort of texture packs over, you know, all the enemies that you fight. For example, what if you released one that was like, you know, Pip? That would be awesome. I'd pay any amount of money for that, honestly. Like, I think you guys should probably just put Pip as the default enemy character model. That might be a good idea. Yeah. So, yeah.